You know, there is this expectation we all have with modern medicine that taking a daily pill is like flipping a switch.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, you have a headache, you take ibuprofen, and the headache fades. You have high blood pressure, you take a beta blocker, the pressure drops.
Exactly.
It is supposed to be reliable, it is supposed to be static. But what happens when the underlying biology of the person taking that pill is suddenly, well, anything but static?
The environment that the medication was designed to operate in essentially just shifts overnight.
Yeah.
I mean, the drug might be exactly the same down to the milligram,
Okay.
but the landscape it is entering is completely foreign, and the result is a medication that stops acting the way anyone expects it to.
Which is wild. And that brings us to today. Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive where we are putting that exact biological shift under the microscope for you. We are exploring the intersection of mental health and menopause. And specifically, we are focusing on a highly complex question. We want to figure out how fluctuating menopausal hormone levels actually impact the absorption and the efficacy of SSRI and SNRI antidepressants.
That's a huge topic.
It really is. We are looking at a scenario where a medication that, might have worked perfectly well for years suddenly feels like it is completely failing. Or maybe a brand new prescription just acts entirely unpredictably.
And it is a dynamic that affects millions of women. Yet historically, it just hasn't received the attention it deserves in the medical field.
Right.
We are talking about a phase of life where the rules of neurobiology seem to be rewritten on a weekly basis, really.
Yeah.
And the standard psychiatric playbook just struggles to keep up.
So to figure out why this happens, we have gathered a stack of research for you. We've got comprehensive clinical trials, peer-reviewed neurobiology papers from MDPI and Frontiers, position statements from the North American Menopause Society, and even robust data from the landmark STAR Depression study.
Some really fantastic sources.
Yeah, they are. And our mission today is to decode the biological roller coaster of perimenopause. We want to understand the why and the how behind this pharmaceutical unpredictability.
Absolutely.
So let's start by establishing a baseline. Before we can figure out why the antidepressants stop working, I think we need to understand what the brain's neurochemical environment looks like when hormones are at their premenopausal levels.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have to look closely at the relationship between estrogen, specifically estradiol, which is the primary estrogen during the reproductive years, and serotonin.
Okay.
The literature often describes estradiol as having a very nurturing, almost architectural role towards serotonin. Estrogen doesn't just, happen to hang out in the same brain regions. It is fundamentally involved in the entire life cycle of that neurotransmitter.
So it is actively involved.
Very much so. It manufactures it, it protects it, and it optimizes how it gets used.
Okay, let's break down that manufacturing side first. These sources highlight an enzyme called tryptophan hydroxylase, or TPH2. How does estrogen interact with that?
Well, TPH2 is the key catalyst that synthesizes serotonin in the brain. It takes raw materials from your diet and essentially converts them into the neurotransmitter.
Right.
And estrogen actively stimulates the expression of this enzyme. So when estrogen levels are robust and stable, the brain gets a strong signal to keep that TPH active.
Which ensures a steady production line of serotonin.
Exactly. A steady, reliable production.
But estrogen's job doesn't stop at just telling the brain to make more, right? It also plays defense. The research points out that estrogen suppresses a different enzyme called monoamine oxidase A, or MAOA.
Yeah, so MAOA acts like the brain's cleanup crew. Its primary function is to degrade or destroy serotonin once it has been used, just to prevent buildup.
Okay.
By suppressing MAOA, estrogen essentially ties the hands of the cleanup crew. It prolongs the active life of the serotonin that has just been produced.
So it allows it to circulate in the brain longer before being broken down.
Precisely. Yeah. And it goes even one step further. Estrogen also increases the actual density and the binding capability of serotonin receptors, specifically the 5-HT2A receptors.
Oh, wow. And those are in critical areas of the brain, right?
Yeah, areas like the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus, which govern executive function, mood regulation, memory.
I like to think of estrogen as the CEO of a serotonin factory.
I love that.
Yeah, like when the CEO is in the building, she keeps the production lines, the TPH2, running at a brisk pace. She strictly limits the hours of the waste disposal crew, the MAOA. And the result is this highly efficient factory with a massive surplus of serotonin and plenty of loading the receptors just ready and waiting to receive the product.
That analogy captures the mechanics perfectly. Estrogen manages the synthesis, slows down the degradation, and optimizes the reception. It is a highly tuned, highly managed system.
Right.
But there is a crucial nuance here. It is not about simply having the highest possible absolute levels of estrogen.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The serotonin system actually thrives on predictability. When estrogen levels are relatively stable, even if they aren't at their absolute lifetime peak, the serotonin factory just hums along smoothly. The brain adjusts to a consistent baseline and maintains a balanced mood.
Okay, let's unpack this. If stability is the key to a functioning serotonin system, does that mean the real villain of the menopausal transition isn't the fact that estrogen eventually goes away?
What's fascinating here is that the roller coaster is the problem, not the end of the ride.
The roller coaster.
Exactly. During perimenopause, which, can last for years before the final menstrual period, estrogen and progesterone levels swing wildly. You aren't just dealing with a slow, graceful decline into menopause.
Right. It's not a gentle slope.
Not at all. You are dealing with a period of severe neurological chaos.
And the sources highlight this incredible pilot study published in Frontiers that zeroed in on this exact concept.
Yes.
They didn't just measure absolute hormone levels, they measured the actual fluctuation. They tracked something called E1G over a 12-week period. What did they find there?
Well, E1G is a urinary metabolite of estradiol, which gives researchers a really reliable window into what estrogen is doing in the body day to day.
Okay.
And they discovered that it is the standard deviation across those weeks, the actual degree of fluctuation, that directly triggers negative mood impacts.
Wow.
Yeah, it was the women experiencing the most aggressive, unpredictable swings rather than those with the lowest overall hormone levels who suffered the most.
So the swings are the trigger.
Absolutely. They experienced heightened sensitivity to psychosocial stress, depressive symptoms, and anhedonia, which is basically the psychological term for the complete inability to feel pleasure in things you normally enjoy.
Because the brain is essentially experiencing repeated acute withdrawals from estrogen's neuroprotective effects. Every time the level drops sharply, the brain just goes into a state of shock. But it isn't just estrogen doing this, right? The sources point out that severe drops in progesterone also play a huge role here, specifically in decreasing serotonin receptor expression. I'm a little fuzzy on the mechanism there, though. How does a drop in a completely different hormone end up damaging the serotonin loading docks?
Well, it comes down to how progesterone interacts with the brain's broader stress management system. Progesterone converts into a metabolite that binds to GABA receptors.
GABA.
Right. And GABA is the central nervous system's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. Think of it as the brain's brake pedal.
Okay, the brake pedal.
Yeah. It promotes calm and reduces excitability. So when progesterone plummets unpredictably alongside estrogen, you lose that calming brake pedal.
Oh, wow.
The brain becomes hyperexcitable and stressed. This chronic neurochemical stress state overwhelms the broader neural network. And as a survival mechanism to protect against overstimulation, the brain actually downregulates or reduces the expression of certain serotonin receptors.
So you are losing structural supports for mental well-being from multiple different angles simultaneously?
Exactly. You lose the serotonin, you lose the calming brakes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Going back to our factory analogy, it's not that the CEO of the serotonin factory just gracefully retired and handed over the keys.
Right.
She's unpredictably walking in and out of the building every few days. One day she's there and the lines are running. The next day she vanishes, the GABA brake pedal gets ripped out, the waste disposal crew goes rogue, and the loading docks are physically dismantled.
It is total chaos.
And the neurotransmitters have no idea what to expect from one day to the next.
The system simply cannot adapt fast enough to the changing directives. By the time the brain tries to adjust to a low estrogen environment, a sudden surge hits.
Right.
But by the time it adjusts to the surge, the floor drops out again.
So if hormone levels are fluctuating this aggressively week to week and the entire physical structure of the brain's mood center is shifting, does that mean our traditional approach of prescribing a static daily dose of an SSRI is essentially trying to hit a moving target?
It is the definition of a moving target. And this shifting landscape explains why the efficacy and absorption of SSRIs and SRIs become deeply compromised during perimenopause.
Right, because the drugs themselves have limitations.
Exactly. To understand the why here, we have to look at the mechanical limitations of the drugs.
Let's do that. So SSRI stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And I think there is a misconception out there that these pills magically create new serotonin out of thin air.
That is a very common misconception.
But they don't. They simply block the reuptake, the recycling process of the serotonin that your brain has already produced, trapping it in the synaptic gap between neurons longer so it can keep stimulating the receptors.
Right. And that reliance on existing serotonin is the drug's critical vulnerability. And SSRI requires the brain to provide the raw material.
Wow. Okay.
Now, layer in the perimenopausal fluctuations we just outlined. If a sudden drop in estrogen means the brain isn't manufacturing enough serotonin to begin with because the TPH2 enzyme is downregulated,
Yeah.
and whatever little serotonin is made is being destroyed rapidly because the MAOA cleanup crew is upregulated, well, the SSRI has very little raw material to work with. You cannot trap serotonin in the synaptic gap if it isn't there.
It's like trying to keep a swimming pool filled by plugging the drain. The SSRI is the plug,
Yes.
but because of the hormone fluctuations, someone keeps unpredictably turning the supply hose off and on. You can plug the drain perfectly, but if there's no water coming out of the hose, the pool is still going to be empty.
That is exactly what is happening, and we see this play out in the clinical data. The landmark STARD study, which is one of the largest and most comprehensive studies on depression treatment ever conducted, explicitly documented this.
What did they find?
They documented that a woman's menopausal status significantly impacts her response to antidepressant treatment. The efficacy becomes blunted and the unpredictability of the treatment just spikes.
And it gets even more complicated than just the supply of serotonin, right? The sources also detail how these hormones affect the actual physical absorption and metabolism of the pills in the liver.
Yes, the liver plays a huge role.
We hear terms like pharmacokinetics and bioavailability thrown around in the research. Can you break down what is actually happening in the liver when these hormones fluctuate?
Well, the liver is the body's primary chemical processing plant. When you swallow a pill, it has to pass through the liver before it reaches the bloodstream and eventually the brain.
Okay.
And the liver uses these specific proteins called CYP enzymes to metabolize or dismantle medications.
Right, the CYP enzymes.
Yeah. And hormones like estrogen actually help regulate the genes that build these CYP enzymes. So when estrogen levels are swinging wildly, the liver is constantly changing the size and the efficiency of its chemical dismantling crew.
Meaning, the way the body handles the drug, the pharmacokinetics, is changing day to day.
Exactly.
And the amount of the drug that actually survives the liver to reach the brain, the bioavailability, is also changing.
That constant shifting alters the clearance rate of the antidepressants. So even if you swallow a precise 20 milligram pill every morning at the exact same time, the actual therapeutic amount crossing the blood-brain barrier is fluctuating based on what your liver is doing that specific day.
Wow, so 1 week, your body might clear the drug too fast and the dose feels too low.
Right.
And then the next week, the liver slows down, the drug builds up, and the dose feels overwhelmingly high. That sounds like a recipe for sudden, severe side effects.
It absolutely is. It leads to extreme therapeutic variability. Women report sudden onsets of nausea, dizziness, insomnia, sexual dysfunction, all without ever changing their prescription.
That is so frustrating.
The body's ability to process the medication is quite literally shifting under its own feet.
And the sources mention one more complicating factor in this perfect storm. The 5-HT1A autoreceptor. What is this and how does perimenopause mess with it?
Oh, yeah. The 5-HT1A autoreceptor acts as an internal negative feedback loop for the brain. When it senses a sudden increase in serotonin, like when you first start taking an SSRI, it hits the brakes.
Okay.
It sends a signal to the brain saying, hey, we have too much serotonin in the gap, stop making more. Normally, it takes a few weeks of consistent medication for this autoreceptor to basically give up, desensitize, and allow the SSRI to do its job.
Right. That's why antidepressants take weeks to work.
Exactly. But during perimenopause, the hormonal chaos constantly jerks this autoreceptor around, preventing it from properly desensitizing.
Jeez. So the production is erratic, the degradation is uncontrolled, the liver's metabolism is shifting, and the brain's internal feedback loops are misfiring.
It is a mess.
It is no wonder that a drug relying on a stable biological foundation struggles to perform its primary psychiatric function. But I have a major point of confusion here.
Okay.
If the serotonin system is so starved and chaotic that these pills can't reliably fix mood, why do doctors actively prescribe SSRIs to treat the physical symptoms of menopause?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it seems like a massive contradiction, doesn't it?
It really does.
But it turns out that while hormones are wreaking havoc on an SSRI's ability to treat clinical depression, these medications have an entirely separate, alternate mechanism of action.
An alternate mechanism.
Yeah. They are remarkably effective at treating the vasomotor symptoms of menopause, namely the physical hot flashes and night sweats.
Wait, SSRIs and SNRIs actually have a direct effect on how the body controls its core temperature?
They do. They act directly on the thermoregulatory center in the hypothalamus. And what is fascinating is how they achieve this. The hypothalamus responds to these reuptake inhibitors at much lower doses than what is typically required to treat clinical depression.
Really? Low doses.
Yeah. For instance, paroxetine, which is an SSRI, is actually FDA approved specifically for hot flashes at a microdose of just 10 milligrams.
Wow, just 10 milligrams.
Right. And other medications like escitalopram and the SNRI venlafaxine are also highly effective off-label for this exact purpose.
Well, the numbers and the sources are incredibly encouraging on this front. At these low doses, these medications can reduce total hot flashes and night sweats by up to 66%.
It is substantial relief.
And unlike the weeks it takes for the psychiatric benefits to kick in, they start working for the physical symptoms in just 1 to 2 weeks.
Yes.
I imagine taking a much lower dose also helps with the side effect profile.
Crucially, yes. Because they are utilized at such low doses, women tend to avoid the severe side effects seen at higher psychiatric doses. Specifically, the clinical trials show that at these microdoses, they rarely induce the severe sexual dysfunction, the lowered libido, or difficulty achieving orgasm that is so notoriously associated with standard SSRI use.
Right.
It becomes a major quality of life win for women who cannot or choose not to take hormone replacement therapy for their hot flashes.
But the sources do highlight one critical red flag regarding drug interactions, specifically from the North American Menopause Society. If a listener is navigating breast cancer and taking a drug called tamoxifen, there is a major metabolic conflict here, right?
Yes, this is a vital interaction to understand. Certain SSRIs, specifically paroxetine and fluoxetine, are strong inhibitors of that very specific CYP liver enzyme we discussed earlier.
The dismantling crew.
Exactly. Tamoxifen is a prodrug, meaning it has to be broken down by that specific liver enzyme to become active and fight the breast cancer.
Oh, I see.
If you take paroxetine, it blocks the enzyme, impairing the body's ability to activate the tamoxifen, which potentially reduces the benefit of this critical cancer treatment.
That is a huge deal.
It is. So for women taking tamoxifen who need relief from hot flashes, the SNRI venlafaxine is the strongly preferred evidence-based option because it uses a completely different metabolic pathway in the liver.
Okay, so what does this all mean? If we look at the whole picture, are we basically saying that during perimenopause, these heavy-hitting psychiatric drugs are actually acting more reliably as an internal thermostat than they are as antidepressants?
The science absolutely supports that conclusion. The thermoregulatory pathways in the hypothalamus respond to these low doses regardless of the hormonal chaos.
Even while the mood centers of the brain are completely failing to utilize the drug.
Exactly. When estrogen is fluctuating wildly, it sabotages the mechanisms SSRIs rely on to elevate mood while leaving their thermoregulatory benefits largely intact.
Which begs the ultimate question. If SSRIs are acting as a thermostat, but their psychiatric efficacy is completely compromised by this chaotic lack of estrogen, what happens if we step back?
Right.
What happens if, instead of constantly tweaking or increasing the antidepressant dose, we just replace the missing estrogen?
That is currently the most profound question in women's health, honestly. And the sources provide a staggering piece of clinical data to answer it. There was a recent large-scale study conducted at the Newson Clinic involving 1,081 perimenopausal and menopausal women.
Okay, set the scene for us. Who were these women and what happened when they entered the clinic?
Well, every single one of these 1,081 women was already taking an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication. They were already deeply embedded in the psychiatric system, seeking relief from mood disturbances.
Wow.
But the clinicians took a different approach. Instead of adjusting their psychiatric meds, they prescribed them menopausal hormone therapy, HRT, to stabilize their fluctuating estrogen and progesterone levels.
Okay, fixing the foundation.
Exactly. And then they followed up with these women 3 months later to measure the impact of that foundational hormonal stability.
And what were the results after 3 months of HRT?
An astounding 39% of these women were able to either significantly reduce their dose or completely stop taking their psychiatric medications altogether.
Wait, nearly 40%.
Nearly 40%.
That is unbelievable. By stabilizing the estriadol, by ending those wild standard deviations and removing the biological roller coaster, the brain's natural serotonin factory was essentially able to repair itself.
Right.
The CEO came back to the office, the TPH2 production line spun back up, the MAOA waste disposal was brought back under control, and the GABA brake pedal was reinstalled.
The foundation had been repaired. And once the natural serotonin system was restored to equilibrium, the SSRIs either became completely unnecessary or the women were finally able to get therapeutic relief at much slower, more manageable doses.
That is just incredible.
This raises an important question about how we are diagnosing mood disorders in midlife women. If a woman presents in her late 40s with sudden onset anxiety, depression, and brain fog, the historical reflex in medicine has often been to just prescribe an SSRI.
Right, treat the symptoms.
But are we treating the root cause, or are we throwing a medication at a system that doesn't have the biological raw materials to utilize it?
Wait, so the implication of that study is that almost 40% of those women were essentially treating a fundamental neuroendocrine deficiency with a psychiatric drug, simply because the outward symptoms looked identical.
The data heavily points in that direction, yeah. The symptoms of estrogen withdrawal and perimenopausal fluctuation, the anhedonia, profound anxiety, persistent depression, severe insomnia, they mirror the symptoms of generic major depressive disorder incredibly closely. And because of that overlap, the medical field has spent decades treating a foundational hormonal issue with a purely psychiatric tool. And as we've explored today, because of the fluctuating nature of perimenopause, that specific psychiatric tool is uniquely disadvantaged in that chaotic environment.
It's like trying to fix a flickering light bulb in your living room by constantly swapping out the lampshade or buying a new bulb, when the actual problem is a massive, unpredictable fluctuation in the electrical grid powering the entire house.
That is a very accurate way to visualize the disconnect. Now, it is important to state that SSRIs remain a vital, life-saving tool for clinical depression.
Of course.
They also remain an incredibly effective low-dose option for women who cannot or choose not to take HRT for their physical hot flashes.
Right.
However, the broader clinical consensus is beginning to shift. For many women experiencing new-onset mood disturbances directly tied to the menopausal transition, stabilizing the hormonal foundation first might be the most biologically sound, effective approach.
Well, this has been an incredibly eye-opening journey through the neurobiology of midlife. To summarize everything we've unpacked for you today, estrogen is the architect and the manager of your serotonin system. It builds the factories, it manages the waste, and it opens the loading docks.
Exactly.
When perimenopause causes that estrogen and progesterone to violently fluctuate, it pulls the rug out from under the very mechanisms that SSRIs and SNRIs rely on to work. It starves the brain of serotonin, making the psychiatric efficacy of the pills unpredictable, while simultaneously causing frustrating side effects as your liver's metabolic enzymes shift under the influence of those same hormones.
Yet, we also learned that these exact same medications remain a brilliant, fast-acting tool at low doses for fixing the broken hypothalamus thermostat that causes hot flashes.
Right.
But the broader, perhaps most important takeaway is clear. For many women, stabilizing the hormonal foundation with HRT isn't just about managing physical discomfort. It is the ultimate key to restoring the neurochemical equilibrium required for lasting mental health.
It totally reframes how we look at medicine, biology, and how interconnected our systems really are. And we want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as you go about your day.
Yeah.
If hormonal fluctuations can so fundamentally alter the absorption and the efficacy of powerful psychiatric drugs in midlife women, how many other phases of life or how many other daily medications, from pain relievers to cardiac drugs, are we entirely misjudging simply because medical science historically hasn't factored the female hormone cycle into the equation?
It is a profound question, and one that the medical community is finally critically beginning to ask.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.